night was a suffocating presence, its ancient trees twisted like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. Their roots snaked over the ground, tripping unwary steps, while shadows moved with a life of their own. For the crew of 4 railway workers, Sam, Eddie, Kara, and Luis, this grim stretch of wilderness had been a routine inspection site for years. Yet tonight felt different. "Tell me again why we're out here?" Eddie muttered, brushing aside a low-hanging branch. His flashlight cut a weak path through the fog, but it barely held back the dark. "Complaint from a hiker," Sam replied, his gravelly voice calm but clipped. "They said they heard noises. Could be a damaged section of track." Luis chuckled nervously, his breath forming clouds in the cold. "Yeah, noises. Like what? Ghost trains?" Kara shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. "You joke, but my grandmother used to talk about something like that. An old train that took people away. Forever." "Nice bedtime story, Kara," Eddie snapped. "Really sets the mood." As they rounded a bend, Luis stopped dead in his tracks. "Hey, what's that?" The beam of his flashlight fell on something massive and alien in the underbrush. It was a train car, or what used to be one. The steel was mottled with rust, its paint faded to a sickly greenish black. Vines and moss clung to its sides like nature was trying to reclaim it. The windows were fogged, revealing shadowy outlines of something, or someone inside. That shouldn't be here. The train rattled and swayed as it surged forward, its ancient mechanisms grinding with unnatural force. Through the windows, the once familiar forest was replaced by an endless expanse of swirling shadows. The crew huddled in the dimly lit carriage, their flashlights casting nervous beams over the eerie stillness. Kara broke the silence. "What is this thing running on?" "There's no engine crew, no coal, no," she trailed off, her words swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere. Luis pressed his ear to the door leading to the next carriage. "I don't hear anything," he whispered, but his voice cracked with unease. "No wind, no tracks, nothing." "It doesn't matter," Sam said firmly, though his eyes betrayed his own doubts. "We need to figure out how to stop it, or at least get off." Eddie, still clutching the photo of his grandfather, shook his head. "And go where? We don't even know where we are. For all we know, this thing could be flying." As if in response, the train began to slow. The screech of brakes reverberated through the car, sending vibrations up their spines. The workers exchanged uneasy glances as the train rolled to a stop with a final hiss of steam. The lights flickered, casting jittery shadows on the walls. Outside, the dense fog had cleared, revealing an unfamiliar landscape. Through the grimy windows, they saw a platform stretching into the darkness, lit by flickering gas lamps. Above it, a warped wooden sign swung in the stagnant air, bearing a name none of them recognized. Station of Remorse. Luis swallowed hard. "What the hell kind of name is that?" "No idea," Kara said, inching toward the door. "But we're not going to find answers sitting here." Sam hesitated, then nodded. "Stay close. No wandering off." The doors groaned open, and an icy wind swept in, carrying with it a faint metallic tang. One by one, they stepped onto the platform. The wood creaked under their boots, as though it hadn't borne weight in decades. The lamps cast long, wavering shadows that seemed to flicker like living things. Eddie pointed toward the end of the platform. "What's that?" A pile of suitcases and duffel bags lay scattered near a rotted bench, their colors faded and their tags worn blank. Kara crouched by one and carefully unzipped it. Inside were clothes, outdated, dusty, but perfectly preserved. She pulled out a child's teddy bear, its button eyes staring lifelessly at her. "It's like someone just left these here," she said softly, her voice tinged with growing dread. "No, ella murmuró. It's like they never came back." Luis wandered toward the edge of the platform, staring into the inky void beyond. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely audible. They all fell silent. At first there was nothing. Then, faint and distant, came the sound of sobbing. It was high-pitched, childlike. An echoed, unrhythmic clatter of the train's wheels was the only sound in the otherwise oppressive silence. Kara, Sam, and Eddie sat huddled together, their backs pressed against the cold steel of the carriage wall. The air inside the train felt heavier now, like it was pressing down on them. "No one else leaves the group," Sam said finally, his voice sharp but shaky. "We stay together no matter what." "What about Luis?" Kara whispered, her voice raw. Her eyes flicked toward the window as if expecting to see him running alongside the train, calling for help. Sam clenched his jaw. "Luis is gone." The words hung in the air like a curse. Eddie didn't respond. He was staring at something farther down the carriage. His face had gone pale, his eyes wide with confusion. "What's wrong?" Kara asked, turning to follow his gaze. In the dim light at the far end of the car, a figure sat slumped in one of the seats. It hadn't been there before. The figure was draped in a tattered coat, its head bowed, and its face obscured by the brim of a hat. Sam rose slowly, pulling a wrench from his tool belt. "Stay back," he murmured. He crept toward the figure, each step echoing loudly in the otherwise silent car. "Excuse me," Sam said cautiously, his grip tightening on the wrench. "Are you?" The figure moved suddenly, jerking upright. The brim of the hat tipped back, revealing a face so pale it looked drained of all blood. Its eyes were sunken, the pupils wide and black. A thin smile curled its cracked lips. "Welcome aboard," it rasped, its voice dry and rattling like wind through dead leaves. Sam stumbled back, nearly tripping over his feet. Eddie and Kara gasped, but none of them moved closer. "Who are you?" Kara demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "What are you doing here?" The figure's head tilted unnaturally to the side, as if considering the question. "I'm like you," it said slowly, its smile widening. "A traveler. But unlike you." It leaned forward, the shadows deepening the hollows of its face. "I've been here longer." Eddie found his voice, though it was barely above a whisper. "What do you mean? How long?" The figure laughed, a dry, hollow sound that made their skin crawl. "Time doesn't work the same here. You'll see. We're getting off this train," Sam said firmly, stepping between the figure and the others. "Whatever this is, we're not staying." The figure's laughter stopped abruptly. It straightened, its movements jerky and unnatural. "There's no getting off. Not for you. Not anymore." Sam raised the wrench threateningly. "We'll see about that." The figure didn't flinch. Instead, it leaned back in its seat. Sam slammed the door shut behind them, his chest heaving with the effort. The three of them collapsed in the next carriage, the faint whispers from the station of echoes seeping through the thin walls like water through a cracked dam. "What were those things?" Kara gasped, clutching her knees as she tried to steady her breathing. Eddie shook his head, his voice trembling. "They look like people we know. People we've lost." His eyes flicked toward Kara. "That was your mom, wasn't it?" Kara glared at him, but her lower lip trembled. "It looked like her," she whispered. "But it wasn't her. It couldn't be." Sam leaned against the door, wiping sweat from his brow. "That wasn't real. None of this is. It's, I don't know, something this train does to mess with us." "But what if it was her?" Kara asked, her voice cracking. "What if I just left her?" The thought hung heavy in the air, but Sam wouldn't let it linger. "We can't think like that. Whatever's out there, it isn't human. It isn't real. It's just trying to keep us here." Eddie sat back, staring at the flickering lights overhead. "The guy in the hat said we'd see what we've left behind. What does that even mean? What the hell is this place?" Sam shook his head, his expression grim. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's feeding off us. Our fear, our guilt." He gestured toward the locked door. "That station, it's meant to make us give up. Step off the train. And if we do?" Kara asked softly. Sam didn't answer. He didn't need to. The train lurched forward, the sudden motion throwing them off balance. Kara's flashlight rolled across the floor, its beam catching on something in the corner of the carriage. She crawled toward it, curiosity overriding her fear. "What is it?" Eddie asked, noticing her hesitation. Kara held up a small suitcase. The leather was scuffed and worn, the brass clasps tarnished with age. But what made her heart stop was the luggage tag hanging from the handle. Scrawled in a neat, familiar script was her own name. "No way," she whispered, running her fingers over the faded letters. This is mine. I haven't seen this since... Since when? Sam asked, moving closer. Since I was 8, Kara said, her voice trembling. I lost it on a trip with my dad. We were on a train, a rail train. Eddie's eyes darted toward the rows of luggage on the racks above them. What if, he swallowed hard, what if all of this is stuff people lost? People who ended up here? Kara opened the suitcase with trembling hands. Inside were toys, crumpled drawings, and a small journal. She flipped through the pages, each one filled with childish scrawls and doodles of stick figures. Her breath caught when she saw a picture of a train surrounded by dark scribbles. I used to dream about this train, she whispered. After I lost the suitcase, I had nightmares about it over and over. Sam grabbed her shoulder. That's not a coincidence. Whatever this place is, it's connected to us. The train began to slow again, the whistle screaming like a wounded animal. Through the windows, the fog parted to reveal another platform, this one barely illuminated by a single flickering bulb. The sign above the station read, "Crossroads of Regret." "No," Sam said firmly, backing away from the door. "We're not getting off this time, no matter what." But as the train screeched to a halt, the air grew heavy with a new sound. Footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, echoing through the car like the ticking of a clock. The three of them froze, their eyes fixed on the door to the previous carriage. The footsteps grew louder, and then a voice called out, "You left me behind." Eddie's face went ashen. No, it can't be." Sam moved in front of him, his grip tightening on the wrench. "What is it?" Eddie's lips trembled as he stared at the door. "My brother," he whispered. "I left him. When we were kids, I ran, and he didn't make it." The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. It was a young man, no older than 16, with Eddie's same brown eyes and a fresh scar running across his cheek. His clothes were torn, his hands bloodied. "You promised you wouldn't leave me," the boy said, his voice shaking. "You promised." "I didn't mean to," Eddie cried, backing away. "I didn't know. I was just a kid." The boy stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with something that wasn't entirely human. "You ran. You saved yourself." Sam grabbed Eddie, pulling him toward the rear of the car. "Run. Now." The three of them bolted into the next carriage as the boy lunged forward, his mouth twisting into an inhuman snarl. The door slammed shut behind them, but the pounding on the other side was relentless. "Is it real?" Kara panted, tears streaming down her face. Was that really his brother? Sam shook his head and plunged into darkness, so complete it felt like a physical weight pressing against them. Their flashlights flickered, struggling to hold back the void. Sam's voice cut through the stillness, sharp and commanding. "Stick together. No splitting up." Kara and Eddie murmured their agreement, their voices thin and frayed. The air in the car was colder now, carrying the faint scent of burning metal. The floor beneath their feet vibrated slightly, like the heartbeat of a slumbering beast. "This is insane," Eddie whispered. "We're moving, but there's no noise. No tracks. How is this train even running?" "No clue," Sam said, his grip tightening on the wrench. "But if it's moving, there's got to be a control room. Or conductor. We're finding it." Kara glanced nervously at the racks of luggage above them, expecting to see something, anything, shift in the shadows. And what if the conductor's like the guy in the hat? Or worse? Sam didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. They moved cautiously through the car, their flashlights sweeping over the rows of empty seats. Every so often, they caught a fleeting glimpse of something out of place. A reflection in the window that didn't match their movements. A dark smear on the floor that seemed to pulse and writhe when illuminated. "Do you hear that?" Kara whispered, stopping abruptly. They fell silent, listening. At first, there was nothing but the faint hum of the train. Then, from somewhere up ahead, came the faint sound of humming. A deep, guttural tune that rose and fell like the grinding of rusted gears. Sam motioned for them to follow, and they crept toward the source of the sound. The next door creaked open with agonizing slowness, revealing a narrow corridor bathed in flickering red light. The humming grew louder, accompanied by the rhythmic clanking of metal on metal. "This feels wrong," Eddie said, his voice trembling. "We should turn back." "And do what?" Sam snipped. "Wait for the train to eat us alive?" "We keep going." They pressed forward, the red light casting unsettling shadows on the walls. The corridor ended at another door, this one marked with a faded plaque, "Conductor's Cabin." The humming was louder now, so loud it vibrated in their chests. Sam reached for the handle, but hesitated. He glanced back at the others. "Ready?" Kara nodded, though her face was pale. Eddie looked like he was on the verge of bolting, but he clenched his fists and gave a reluctant nod. Sam turned the handle, and the door swung open. The cabin was larger than it should have been, impossibly vast. The walls stretched into darkness, their surfaces lined with endless rows of rusted levers, gauges, and wheels. At the center of the room was a throne-like chair, cobbled together from jagged metal and splintered wood. Seated in it was a figure draped in tattered robes, its face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat identical to the one worn by the passenger they'd seen earlier. "Welcome," the figure rasped, its voice grating and hollow. "You've come far." Sam stepped forward, his knuckles white around the wrench. "Who are you? What is this place?" The figure chuckled to sound like grinding stones. "I am the conductor, and this is your journey." "Our journey?" Karasapat. "We didn't choose this. Didn't you?" The conductor leaned forward, the brim of its hat casting a shadow over its face. "You've all boarded before, whether you remember or not. This train doesn't seek passengers. It finds those who have already chosen to ride. Some is stomach twisted." "What the hell are you talking about?" The conductor gestured lazily toward the walls. The red light brightened, illuminating countless framed photographs. Each one showed a familiar face. Kara as a child, standing with her suitcase. Eddie and his younger brother on a rickety bridge. Sam in his uniform, his eyes hollow and tired. "What is this?" Kara demanded, her voice shaking. Sam's fingers hovered over the lever, the rough rust brushing against his skin. Every muscle in his body screamed for him to pull it, to make the train stop, if it would stop. But a deeper instinct warned him that whatever the conductor was offering wasn't salvation. "This is a trap," Sam said, his voice low but firm. "Everything on this train is a trick to keep us here." "And what if it's not?" Kara whispered, glancing at the endless photos lining the walls. Each face stared back at her, a haunting reminder of what they'd all lost. What if pulling it is the only way to end this? Eddie grabbed her arm, his expression frantic. "Don't! You heard what it said. It doesn't want us to get off. This thing is playing with us." The conductor tilted its head, its faceless visage somehow conveying amusement. "The choice is always yours," it rasped. "But beware, indecision carries its own price." The room trembled slightly, as if the train itself was growing impatient. The hum of the machinery grew louder, vibrating in their chests like the tolling of a massive bell. Sam stepped back from the lever, his eyes narrowing. "What happens if we don't pull it?" The conductor's voice was calm, almost serene. "Then the train continues, and your journey does not end." The words sank into the silence, heavy and suffocating. Kara's hand twitched at her side, her breathing shallow. "If we keep going," she said, her voice cracking, "what's waiting for us at the end?" The conductor didn't answer. Instead, it reached into the folds of its tattered robe and withdrew a small object. It placed the item on the armrest of the jagged throne with an almost reverent gesture. It was a pocket watch, its face cracked, the hand spinning wildly. Sam squinted at it and felt his blood run cold. The watch wasn't just spinning, it was rewinding. "That's mine," Sam said, his voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, drawn to the watch as if by an invisible thread. Memories surfaced, unbidden and vivid. Sitting in his father's lap as a boy, the watch gleaming in the sunlight. He'd taken it the day his father passed, a talisman to hold on to something that was slipping away. The conductor's smooth, featureless face turned toward him. "It is, and it is not." Sam stopped short, his pulse pounding in his ears. "What do you mean?" The conductor gestured lazily toward the endless rows of photos and items on the walls. Everything here belongs to someone who boarded this train. Every regret, every memory, every choice. You carry them with you, and yet they weigh you down. Kara stepped forward, her voice trembling. If this train is about our regrets, then what? We're supposed to what? Let them go. Letting go is one choice, the conductor said. But holding on is easier, isn't it? So many prefer to stay, to remain part of the train. Eddie's voice was a low growl. You keep saying people become part of the train. What does that mean? The conductor stood slowly, its tall frame unfolding like a marionette on tangled strings. It stepped aside, revealing a large, grimy window behind the throne. The glass was streaked with soot, but through it, they could see the length of the train stretching into the darkness. At first, it looked like a mechanical masterpiece. Cogs turning, gears grinding, pipes pumping steam. But as they stared, the truth became clear. The machinery was made of people. Arms jutted from gears, legs twisted into pistons, faces stretched across rusted plates like warped reflections. Karagak, koverin karmaut. Eddie stumbled back, his flashlight clattering to the floor. What the hell is this? They remain, the conductor said simply, bound to the train, feeding it, fueling it. Sam's voice was a low snarl. Not us. We're not staying. The conductor didn't move, its blank face unreadable. Then what will you do, Samuel? Run? Pull the lever and take control? Or will you finally face the weight you carry? Sam's hand clenched into a fist. We're finding a way off this thing. Together. You believe that is a choice, the conductor said, stepping back toward its throne. But the train does not release its passengers easily. The room trembled again, the hum of the machinery rising to a deafening roar. The photos on the walls began to shift and blur, the faces twisting into carriage. The train hurled forward with a speed that felt unnatural, the lights flickering erratically as if the very power of the train was struggling to hold itself together. The trio staggered into the next carriage, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The air here was different, dense and oppressive, charged with a static that made the hairs on their arms stand on end. The walls of this carriage were lined with mirrors, each one tall and narrow, their frames ornate and tarnished with age. The mirrors reflected not only their tired, pale faces but distorted shadows that didn't match their movements. What is this? Kara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sam scanned the room warily, the wrench clutched tightly in his hand. Another trick. Keep moving. Don't look too long. Eddie, however, was already transfixed by his reflection. Wait, this isn't right. He moved closer to one of the mirrors, his face growing pale. That's me, but not me. Kara and Sam turned to see what he was talking about. In the mirror, Eddie stood in a darkened room, his younger self kneeling beside a boy. The boy's face was obscured, but Eddie's reflection wore an expression of terror. No, Eddie whispered, shaking his head. I didn't, this isn't. The mirror began to ripple like water, the scene coming alive. The boy on the ground clutched his chest, gasping for breath, while Eddie's reflection stood frozen, tears streaming down his face. Help me, the boy wheezed. Please, Eddie. Stop, Eddie begged, stepping back. Stop it. I couldn't. The mirror shattered with a deafening crack, shards raining onto the floor, but disappearing before they landed. Eddie collapsed to his knees, shaking violently. Kara grabbed his shoulder. Eddie, it's not real. It's this place messing with us. Look at me, not the mirrors. But her voice faltered as she caught sight of another mirror. This one held her own reflection, but she wasn't alone. Her mother stood beside her, pale and gaunt, her once warm eyes sunken and accusing. You left me, Kara, the reflection said. You could have helped. You could have stayed. Why didn't you stay? Karaste gered bakir, tivs bulurink her vision. No, I didn't know. I didn't know you were sick. You didn't want to know, her mother's reflection hissed, her voice growing shrill. You were too busy running away. Kara, Sam barked, grabbing her arm and yanking her away from the mirror. Don't listen to it. None of this is real. Kara tore her gaze from the mirror, her chest heaving as sobs racked her body. "It felt real," she whispered, clutching Sam's sleeve. "It felt so real." "It's what this place does," Sam said, his voice firm but strained. "It shows you your worst moments, your regrets, but it's not real. It's just trying to break us." They turned to him, their faces pale and haunted, as he gestured to the length of the carriage. "We need to get out of here. Now!" They began to move, careful not to look at the mirrors. But as they neared the end of the carriage, Sam caught a glimpse of his own reflection out of the corner of his eye. He froze. "Sam, don't," Kara warned, but it was too late. In the mirror, Sam stood alone in his patrol uniform. His face was older, more haggard, and his eyes were filled with a hollow regret. Beside him lay a man, bleeding out on the pavement, his hand outstretched towards Sam. A voice drifted from the reflection, soft but clear. "You didn't save me, Sam. You could've, but you didn't." Sam's reflection sank to its knees, his hands trembling as they pressed against the wound. "I tried," he whispered. "I tried to save you. But you didn't," the voice replied, colder now. "You let me die." The mirror rippled violently, and Sam felt a sharp pull in his chest, like something was trying to drag him into the glass. Kara grabbed his arm, yanking him. The train slowed again, the shriek of brakes reverberating through the carriage like a wounded animal. Outside, the streaks of stars condensed into a solid, ethereal platform suspended in the void. It seemed to shimmer, as though it wasn't entirely real. Floating lanterns cast a ghostly glow, their flames swaying in an unseen wind. Above the platform, a sign swayed back and forth, its words etched in flickering light. "Station of choices." "What now?" Eddie muttered, gripping the edge of his seat. His knuckles were white, his face drawn and pale. "What's it going to show us this time?" Kara glanced toward the door, her expression guarded. "We don't have to get off. We've stayed on the train at every other stop. Maybe we should just keep going." "Maybe it wants us to get off," Sam said quietly, standing and gripping the door handle. His eyes flicked toward the shimmering platform. "And maybe this is where we find the answers." Eddie's voice rose, tinged with panic. "Or maybe it's a trap. Every time we've gotten close to something, it's been a trick, a way to break us." Sam turned back to them, his voice steady but firm. "Look, I don't know what's waiting out there, but we can't keep running. If we don't face this, we'll just keep going. Forever." Kara hesitated, then stood. "I'm with you." Eddie stared at them, his breathing shallow. He looked toward the window, the glowing platform reflected in the glass. "Fine," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "But if this goes bad, I'm blaming both of you." Sam opened the door, and the three of them stepped onto the platform. The air outside was cool and still, carrying a faint metallic tang that reminded them of blood. The platform beneath their feet felt solid, but its surface rippled faintly like the surface of a lake. At the far end of the platform stood 3 doors, each identical in size and shape, but marked with different symbols. One bore the outline of a key, another a flame, and the third a hollow circle. Above the doors, an inscription glowed faintly in the air. "Choose and be free. Choose and remain. Choose and forget." "What does that mean?" Kara whispered, staring at the inscription. Sam approached the doors cautiously, his boots echoing softly on the strange surface. "It's another game, another test." Eddie pointed at the inscription, his voice rising. "What kind of choice is that? Be free? Remain? Forget? None of this makes any sense." Kara moved closer to the door with the flame symbol, her hand hovering just above the handle. "What if it's not a trick this time? What if this is the way out? Or a way deeper in?" Eddie muttered, standing well back from the doors. Sam studied the symbols, his mind racing. The key, freedom. The flame, maybe a challenge? Or destruction? And the circle, forgetting, starting over. "And if we choose wrong?" Kara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sam didn't answer. He approached the door with the key, the one that promised freedom. His hand trembled as he reached for the handle. "You don't have to do this," Kara said, her voice steady now. "We can wait. Think it through." Sam shook his head. "We've been waiting long enough." The handle was cold to the touch, and as Sam turned it, a wave of nausea washed over him. The door swung open, revealing a corridor filled with blinding white light. A voice, calm, monotone, and inhuman, spoke from within. Freedom requires the burden. Sam's eyes burned as he stepped into the corridor of blinding white light. The door shut behind him with a final, echoing click, and the platform, the train, and his companions disappeared. The air here was sterile and heavy, carrying the faint scent of ozone. His footsteps echoed on the smooth, seamless floor, though he couldn't see what lay ahead or behind. Freedom requires the burden of truth, the calm voice repeated, resonating within the endless white expanse. What truth? Sam called out, his voice swallowed by the space around him. What am I supposed to find here? The light dimmed slightly, and shapes began to take form in the distance. At first, they were blurry like figures moving behind frosted glass. As he drew closer, the shapes sharpened into scenes, memories, vivid and unavoidable. The first memory hit like a punch to the gut. He saw himself in his patrol car, parked under a street light on a deserted road. A call crackled through the radio, a report of a stranded driver needing assistance. But Sam had ignored it, too exhausted to care after a double shift. He watched as the scene played out, his younger self reclining in the seat, eyes heavy with sleep. The memory shifted, the stranded car now a crime scene. Police tape fluttered in the breeze, and paramedics loaded a stretcher into an ambulance. The victim's face was obscured, but Sam knew who it was. A young woman who'd been attacked after waiting hours for help that never came. No, Sam whispered, shaking his head. I didn't know. I didn't. You chose comfort over duty, the voice said, emotionless. And someone paid the price. The memory dissolved, replaced by another. This time, Sam stood in the doorway of his home, arguing with a woman, his wife. She clutched a suitcase, her face streaked with tears. You're never here, she shouted. You care more about your job than your family. Sam watched as his past self shouted back, his voice full of anger and frustration. You think this job is easy? You think I have a choice? The memory faded to black, leaving only the sound of a door slamming and a child crying softly in the background. Sam sank to his knees, his chest tight. I didn't mean to hurt them. I thought I was doing the right thing. Every choice has a cost, the voice replied. And freedom means accepting those costs. The light around him began to pulse, and Sam felt the weight of his memories pressing down on him. He'd always thought of himself as the hero, the one who did what needed to be done. But now, faced with the truth, he saw the cracks in his armor. Kara stumbled as she stepped into the inferno. Flames roared on either side of a narrow path, licking at her heels but never quite touching her. The heat was suffocating, her skin slick with sweat. To burn is to face your pain, the voice said, crackling like firewood. Endure, and you may emerge whole. The flames parted ahead, revealing a scene from her childhood. Kara stood in a small, cluttered living room, her mother sitting on the couch with a blanket draped over her frail shoulders. The younger Kara had her back turned, her hands gripping the straps of a backpack. I'll be back soon, the young Kara said, her voice brittle. I need some space. Her mother's voice was weak, barely above a whisper. Stay a little longer, please. The train slowed for the final time, its momentum bleeding into an unnatural stillness. The faint sound of a whistle echoed in the distance, a haunting, mournful tone that seemed to signal both an end and a beginning. The carriages groaned as if reluctant to stop, and then the train came to a complete halt. Outside the windows, there was no station. Only a vast, endless void stretched in every direction, its surface shimmering like black glass. The door to each of the passengers' trials reopened, spilling them back into the central carriage. Sam emerged first, his shoulders hunched under the weight of what he had seen. His expression was grim, his eyes hollow. Kara stumbled in next, her skin glistening with sweat and her breath coming in shallow gasps. She looked at Sam, then at the empty door behind her. Where's Eddie? She whispered. Sam shook his head, his throat too tight to answer. They both turned as the door to the void cracked open, its edges glowing faintly. Eddie staggered through, his face pale and his eyes wide, as though he had seen something that had broken him in ways no words could capture. "Eddie," Kara breathed, rushing to his side. "Are you okay? What happened?" He shook his head, his hands trembling as he clutched at the air. I almost gave it up. All of it. But I couldn't. I didn't want to disappear." Kara and Sam exchanged a look, relief tempered by exhaustion. But before they could speak, the train doors hissed open, revealing the void outside. "What now?" Kara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Sam stepped forward, peering into the darkness. The edge of the platform was gone, replaced by a single shimmering path that stretched out into the abyss. Floating lanterns lined the path, their flickering light illuminating the way forward. "It's not over," Sam said, his voice firm despite the weight of his own doubts. "We have to keep moving." "Moving where?" Eddie asked, his voice tinged with panic. "We don't even know what's out there." "We know what's behind us," Kara said, glancing back toward the doors they'd each emerged from. The glow from their trials was gone, replaced by shadows that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. "And we can't stay here." Sam nodded, stepping onto the shimmering path. It was solid beneath his boots, though it rippled faintly with each step. Kara followed, her gaze darting between the lanterns and the endless void beyond. Eddie hesitated, but with a deep breath, he joined them. The path stretched on for what felt like an eternity. The lanterns grew dimmer as they walked, their flickering light barely holding the darkness at bay. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft sound of their footsteps. Finally, they reached the end of the path, where a single, massive door stood waiting. Its surface was carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and move like living metal. Above the door, a single inscription glowed faintly. "For those who face their truth, the way forward is yours." Sam glanced at Kara and Eddie, his face unreadable. "This is it. What if it's another trick?" Eddie asked, his voice trembling. Kara stepped forward, placing a hand on the door. "What if it's not?" The door swung open silently, revealing a blinding white light. It was warm and inviting, yet impossible to see through. Sam took a deep breath, then stepped inside. Kara followed, her movements hesitant but resolute. Eddie lingered at the threshold, his fists clenched. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice barely audible. Kara turned back, her face softening. "We all are, but we can't stay here. Not after everything." Eddie nodded slowly, then stepped through the door. The three of them awoke in a clearing, the early morning sun filtering through the trees. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth. The train was gone, as if it had never been there. Sam sat up first, rubbing his temples as though shaking off a heavy dream. Kara was next, blinking against the sunlight and clutching the grass beneath her fingers as if grounding herself in reality. Eddie groaned, his body stiff as he rolled onto his side. "Is this real?" Eddie asked, his voice hoarse. "I think so," Kara replied, her eyes scanning the clearing. "But where are we?" Sam stood in the horizon,